Washington's in a great spot with four-star safety Gavin Day.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. All that really does help us out a lot. And just one other quick reminder, make sure you check out our Insider program. The link to that is down in the description below. We've got a Insider exclusive Q&A coming up this Friday. That's going to be a whole lot of fun. You want to make sure you go over there and check it out. It's a free 2-week trial, and after that, it's $4.99 a month. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers out there today. We're going to talk about Jayvon Parker and what his role in this defense might be in 2025. Coming off a torn Achilles, we'll get that in a little bit because 4-star offensive lineman Sam Utu, who has a couple of crystal balls to Washington, he set up a pair of visits with a pair of big-time SEC schools. So we'll get into that in a little while as well, because the big news, which happened right after we pressed stop on record on Sunday, was 4-star safety Gavin Day got a crystal ball to Washington.
And it's one thing where we had talked about it, where recruiting, Taylor May's recruiting him, big hitter, everything just kind of lined up to make sense. And now the crystal balls finally start to come in. And it makes sense. I mean, it's right on the heels of coming in for the official this weekend. And it's one of those positive momentum signs. You can't say it guarantees, he's going to commit, but once one comes in and then a second, usually it's like a 48-hour window where you have one prediction and then 2 or 3 usually follow. And so by the time he actually gets on campus, that already might be telling in terms of, hey, we already know where this is going at the end of it.
So there are a couple of things to consider here. One thing where it's always nice to see coming from one of those, big national writers, somebody like Blair Angulo, because obviously, like we talked about with Brady Smigel, where it ended up being a very different situation than what this is it's usually when those guys start to say, hey, I feel really comfortable about saying this, it means that they're hearing something. We'll talk about that with Sam Utu in a little bit, so stick around for that. But this is one of those cases where, like you said, with his official visit coming up this Friday, all of a sudden, this could turn into more of a let's make sure that this checks every box, more so than a get-to-know-you sort of visit. Because that's why we've talked a lot about him over the course of this month, as the everydayers know, is because we have seen this interest not just pick up a little bit and say, oh, yeah, they seem to like this guy. No, this is a full court press sort of deal. To see it pay off with a crystal ball is a big step in the right direction, because he is such a good fit for this defense. He's got the athleticism to play that post deep safety role if you want him to, but being 6'3", 190, 195, whatever he's at right now, he is such a just perfect fit for that box down safety role, as CJ Christian called it when we talked to him during spring practice, that can play man coverage against tight ends, that can act and run support, that just comes downhill and lays big hits on guys, which is just such a fun part of just this defensive scheme from Ryan Walters. But he's also he has such high-end potential. And we've seen that reflected in his rankings, which obviously don't mean anything since he was ranked in the 900s until about 2.5 weeks ago. But it's one of those things where it's nice to see everybody just sort of get on board and say, yeah, this is a real high-end talent.
And it speaks volumes to what we had talked about going against Iowa. It has the official visit to Arizona scheduled after this, and then has the one to Utah scheduled after that. If he's able to commit, I think we kind of not hinted at this on the show a couple of weeks ago, but when we first started bringing him up, it's, do you get past this weekend? If he shuts down his recruitment by, call it next Wednesday, I'm starting to be less and less surprised, because he's not going to take you're not going to make a commitment and then still take visits. Kids you don't see that as much nowadays. And so if you're able to get that commitment this weekend, and I think that's what's most telling about when this prediction came in. It's not after the visit, it's before the visit, which means there's positive momentum going into the visit. So like you said, it's not let's find out, meet the staff, meet the parents, kind of that, it's get the seal of approval. Let's make sure we're all on the same page with what we believe, because it seems like he's already trending in that direction. And so if you're able to beat Iowa, that's a massive beat in terms of getting a 4-star safety, position of need for Iowa, position of prominence for Iowa. But for Washington, it's also a position of need. And you look at it, the other two schools, Utah, again, that's always an offer that if you have an offer from Utah, you can play. The Arizona one is what it is. But Utah and Iowa versus Washington, like, to me, that's a good solid get right there. And I think when we talked, about closing out the secondary class, that would be a massive way to do it.
Yeah, so I'm glad that that's where you left it, because that's right where I wanted to pick it up. That's why we spent so much talking about the secondary class and what needs there might be on yesterday's show, because we looked at all the positions and just what each player might hold, where, how Celestia Moa might fit into that boat, how, some of these outside corners and Jaron Jones, Devon Benjamin, if that might still be an option, Derek Johnson, how all these different guys just kind of fit into this mold of what Washington and John Richardson, Taylor Mays, Ryan Walters, what they're trying to build in the secondary. Because Gavin Day, it was very clear that one of these big hitter box safety kind of players was a position of great importance, because it wasn't just Gavin Day, it was Chase Calicut as well. And then, of course, we've seen how that recruitment has gone in, where, they got into that recruitment a little bit late as well. And this is kind of why it was nice to have somebody just in a similar mold on the West Coast, because I know we got a couple of questions of, is it really like wording that you lost Chase Calicut? It's yes and no, where, obviously that's such a talented player that you hate to lose out on a recruitment like that. But they made that offer in like late February, early March. So that was something where you were already kind of behind the gun. And it's the same thing with Gavin Day, where having somebody like that a little bit closer to home and with not quite the same level of interest, it's worked to your favor here. And it's something where, maybe you got in there late at the end of the day, but you were able to make up that ground really quickly, and it's paid off.
And I think that's the key with that is you look at who's recruiting him. Obviously, we mentioned Taylor Mays, but it's John Richardson and Ryan Walters, where because Taylor Mays was hired a little bit later in the process, that's why you go and have John Richardson as your overarching DB coach who still runs point on recruitment. But that doesn't mean Taylor Mays is taking a back seat in this. Because when you're talking about playing in your position coach, you have to have those meetings. John Richardson will be running some, but Taylor Mays is going to be running some others as well. And so making sure that relationship caught up. I think that's why that's why Washington is in the position they are, because you have Richardson and Ryan Walters laying the foundation. So Taylor Mays can just come in and say, here's my plan for you. Here's how I plan on coaching you in the room, on the field, that sort of situation. Because otherwise everything else checks the box. How the fit at safety works in Ryan Walters' defense, John Richardson just as a coach in general, the program, and being on the West Coast, keeping that Rocky Mountain to West, that's kind of the lockdown area you have to have. And so anytime you can be in contention especially for a 4-star safety, you have to reel them in. So they seem to be in a pretty good position, but it's now just a matter of closing this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a big part of this. And one thing that I'm really interested in before we move on here is just what that Taylor Mays plan might look like. Because this is the perfect player where it's something that CJ Christian talked to us a little bit about, and some of the other defensive backs did as we got to know them, some of the new guys over spring practice, was the way Taylor Mays communicates the game. And, it's something CJ Lavender mentioned as well. It's just seeing who he was, what kind of player he was in college. And it's, that guy's coaching me. And in Gavin Day's case, he plays a lot like him just in terms of play style, where obviously Taylor Mays was just absolutely incredible, and it's unfair to say anybody's going to be a 3-time first-team All-American, but he just has that same sort of play style of playing with reckless abandon when it comes to tackling and just the big hits that he's able to lay along with that athleticism. So it's one of those things that, if this does end up coming to fruition, I'd really love to see what that plan from Taylor Mays looks like to develop Gavin Day as he puts on another, let's just call it 15 or 20 pounds, because getting up to 210, 215 is going to be absolutely lethal for him. But Lars, Sam Utu, he's also got a couple of crystal balls to Washington, but Washington's got some major competition for him. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. Lars, over the last week or so, 247's put in a crystal ball for Sam Utu to choose Washington. Steve Wiltfong over at On3 did the same thing. So, just like we talked about with Gavin Day, UW is in a really, really good spot here. But over the weekend, he decided to cancel his official visit to USC, replace that with Tennessee, and also add an official visit to Alabama. Now, I don't know about you, but, I'm a little bit more concerned about Alabama than Tennessee in this recruitment for, a couple of reasons that we'll dive into. But I just look at this and I say, I still think Washington is in a really solid spot, but we opened the show with Gavin Day. I think if you're still able to win this battle for Sam Utu, that is, for obviously many reasons, a much, much bigger win.
Oh, absolutely. I think, not to be the contrarian here, but like I told you before the show, the one that worries me is Rocky Top. That's the one that kind of concerns me, because you look at what Tennessee's been kind of known for. When guys go, especially from west to east, and make that visit, sometimes that impresses them in different ways. And so I think that's the one that concerns me, because when you're looking at Alabama, obviously they have the staff relationship that you mentioned, and you can dive into a little bit, but just that one, I think that one you can kind of expect. You can say, hey, you know what? If you're a West Coast guy and Alabama's looking at you, I can understand that. The Tennessee one is the one that intrigues me the most, because obviously Josh Heupel, good offense, all those sorts of things, you're going to be in contention for the CFP. That's one that, to me, if you can hold off Tennessee, that would actually speak a little bit more volumes, just because you don't want to say that the bag drop is the key here, but
sure,
if you're able to beat Tennessee in a school that has no problem throwing kids the bag, I think that's the one that impresses me the most, because that shows, whether it's relationships or whatever, Washington just had the better connection at the end of the day.
So that's why Alabama is just the one that concerns me more in this, because we look at the other schools that are involved in this. It's SMU, who we took an official visit to earlier this month, and then it's Texas, where that one obviously is concerned for its own reason, because Texas has done a fantastic job pumping out offensive linemen. But I feel like Washington is just giving him that opportunity to play early and do all those different things, which I think is really important. And it's why I just feel a little more concerned about Alabama. It's because of those relationships. It's because you said, I mentioned it was something we did discuss before the show, and I want to continue to dive into it. It's we look at that coaching staff of Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Grubb, Nick Sheridan, Jamarcus Shepard, Courtney Morgan, so many others. Shout out to our friend of the program, Ron McKeefrey, Chuck Morrell. I'm rattling off all these names because they were the ones who certainly extended that offer to him originally and spent a good long time building a relationship with him. And now they're just carrying it over to a brand that, pulled Kalen DeBoer away. And I'm not trying to say any of these things to bag on Washington, because that's certainly not what we're about and not what any of this is about. But it's one of those things where that has proven to win out several times in terms of just what these battles have looked like in recent years. And it's why I want to see what Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff can do, because you and I have been on the show saying we believe that Washington can win these battles against programs of that caliber, because Washington, when it's at its best, is a program of that caliber. And I just look at this recruitment in general, and it's Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff have done a phenomenal job building relationships. We've seen Michael Switzer do a tremendous job since taking over as the full-time offensive line coach. And this is such a huge test of that. You already got your first big one out of the way, and arguably a bigger one by flipping Cody Green. But that doesn't mean that Sam Utu is not the same caliber of prospect, and especially for what Washington needs in the Big Ten. And something you and I talked about the other day when he first got these crystal balls, as the everydayers know, it's you can find a way to plug a guy in like that early. Because when you and I, started looking at some of these 2025 guys that signed, whether it be Champ Talilia, John Mills, we didn't expect all of them to find their way out of the field. But we look at especially both of those guys along with Jack Schaefer, who impressed. And it's, if there is a spot for these guys along the offensive line, that's not going to be a shock. And that's something that Jedd Fisch can really sell on top of what has turned into a culture that kids are really buying into.
And one of the kids that brought into it that picked Washington over Alabama in the 2026 class, Derek Zammit. So I think that's another example of a guy where Jedd could probably lean on him a little bit and say, build those relationships. There's also quarterback to offensive lineman. You're talking about that relationship is going to be there already. I think that's an example of one where if you have Derek, a guy from New Jersey, able to, kind of convince Sam and say, hey, I looked at Alabama, I looked at some of these other schools, and yet Washington ended up being the choice for me. You already have a good relationship with the staff. It's that would be kind of a path I could see them going just a little bit where obviously they're not coming in on the same official visit weekend, but just building that relationship with the recruits in the class. I think that would speak volumes because that was a recruitment where Alabama was very much in play for Derek. And I think the fact that, Washington was able to still win out, that's kind of what speaks volumes to both how Jedd is building the program and the relationship factor that Washington has. So I think anytime you take SEC visits, you're going to be concerned, or you're going to, as a fan, you probably would understandably be concerned. But I don't think there's as much concern because of the quality relationships that you mentioned the staff has, where whatever the case is, whatever those factors are, there's something about Jedd Fisch's relationships with guys where they seem to resonate, where it's once you meet them, once you get to know them and start to build that tight-knit connection, it really does seem to trend in Washington's favor more often than not.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that. I want to switch gears here for just a minute because we need to talk about some of these other guys along the offensive line, where Dominic Harris is coming in on his official visit this weekend, and then you've also got Pololite Primus and Colin Campbell. That was the other one. I was like, I know somebody else to set up an official. You've also have those three guys coming in on officials over the next couple of weeks, and I look at that and I say, this is so interesting to me because I think you take one more true tackle, and if both Primus and Sam Utu want to commit, you can take both, but you can also find ways to be a little more selective if you want to, depending on, what other interests might be out there. If there's a flip target, maybe I know Isu Tafa is still scheduled to take an official visit according to 247, who's committed to USC. We'll see how that works out. But I look at all those, and it's one of those things where I think Washington is sitting in a really good spot, but there is no excuse to miss on Sam Utu in any of these realms, because you can set up a really strong offensive line after last year's class by adding on to it with this one. And there's just so much potential here, but he just seems to be the piece that would really tie this all together. Because if you get everybody else that I just mentioned, but you lose Sam Utu to let's just say Texas, let's say he goes to Texas, you're really happy with that class. But with Utu in there, it's just over the top. That's a different level of, best offensive line class since 2020 with Roger Rosengard and Troy Fautanu.
And what did that class have in common? You stay on the West Coast. You stay west of the Rockies. And I think if you get Primus, it's a good get from Texas. And you look at Dom Harris, if you get him from Nevada, you like those takes, but it's the factor of the premium elite talent, the high-end talent. Yeah. We're not saying Dom and Primus are not high-end, but if you're ranking 1, 2, and 3, you probably have Sam Utu at the top of that list. And I think that's kind of the same thing with Rosengard and Troy in 2020, where you looked at it and said, it's not just that you're getting it from good programs, good prospects. It's those are the guys that are going to lay the foundation to get you back to the CFP, which look what happened. That's the exact. I remember actually going back to my Twitter and somebody mentioned hey, in 2019 or 20, they were like, that's going to be the line that does it. It's like, hey, congratulations, you're a solid future. I have the lottery numbers. And Sam Utu provides that same thing with Cody Green, with the rest of the class that you have, plus the guys on the roster. That young foundation, that's why you flip John Mills from Texas. It's why you should prevent Sam Utu from going to Tennessee or Texas or wherever you want, or Alabama or wherever. Because once you're able to establish a 2-3 year run of offensive linemen, elite after elite class, that's where you really start to get into contention year in and year out for the CFP.
So that's all accurate. I have to make one correction on myself there. Troy was 2019, Roger was 2020. But that also just kind of proves the point. It's you continue to stack and you continue to add those bodies. And that's what adding Sam Utu and Cody Green could be on top of Champ Talialia, on top of John Mills, on top of Paki Finau in the 24 class. We're continuing to just build that every single year is what creates a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, which is what we saw when this team went to the national championship. But Lars, speaking of players that had a nice role in that national championship team, Jayvon Parker was one of them, but what's his role going to look like in 2025? Lars, I've been writing some of these, college football magazine previews that I've been doing, and I found myself just kind of going down a rabbit hole about Jayvon Parker, where it's, man, I love what this guy brings to the table. I loved watching him finally have that breakout season last year, that breakout game at Rutgers, and then obviously it ends with the really unfortunate torn Achilles. And I was looking at it, and I was just kind of like, he doesn't need to play this season, where he would be such an awesome addition to what is a very deep, talented defensive line. But there is no need to rush him. And if he's healthy and is 100%, you have no reservations about playing him, awesome. But if not, why not try to find a way to, try to utilize a medical red shirt, since you didn't technically have to last year, since he only played in 4 games.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, the technicality. If you can pick the 5 games. And I think also the underlying thing is you have the depth where you don't need him. And you have his other brother, where you can have Armand be the guy where maybe this is Armand's year. And Jayvon just kind of said, you know what, let me take the rehab year. Let me come back in 26, still play 4 or 5 games, whatever you want to call it, in 2025. But I kind of like that plan better, where you look at Armand had to wait 2 years. Now he finally gets his chance. Jayvon's been the guy for 2 years. Now he can take a back seat. And then you reload in 2026 again with both of them. I think that might be the best plan. I kind of like that, where, yeah, you don't need to rush Jayvon back. I think the earliest I would expect him back would be, what do you want to say, mid-October, September, October? Like, just even if that, just be, in terms of like, because there's no reason to, like you mentioned, there's no reason to rush him back. There's no reason to say, why would you force him back before the Ohio State game or into early October? Like, there's no reason to do that, especially given when the injury occurred in late September, early October.
Yeah, late September. So you're right. I was just thinking about the way that Jedd Fisch talked about it in the spring, which is why I was just kind of like, I don't know. Because when he talked about Jayvon, it was, the plan is to have him cleared and ready for fall camp on August 1st. Obviously, we'll see how that works out. Or we're just talking about what we have been told on just in that regard. Because I look at it and I just say, there's so many of these other defensive linemen that look like, whether it be, Bryce Butler, Omar Khan, Elinneus Davis, whoever you think is going to take that next step forward. That's great. And you add that with Ontario Thompson, Tatai Uyongole, Samode Pepa, Logan Sagapolu being another one, where, especially because I mentioned those last 4 guys at the end, because they're all out of eligibility this season. So if you're able to just kind of get a significant workload out of them, that's great. And if you're able to still, supplement them with Armand Parker, Elinneus Davis, all these other guys, that's even better. And it's one of those things where when you have somebody of Jayvon's talent level, because again, we saw what that looks like. If you don't need to push him this season, there is absolutely no reason to. But again, if he's fully healthy, that's even better, because I just look at this defensive line and I really do believe that it's going to be more productive than some people think, because I think that, as just people across the Big Ten look at it, they're going to say, oh, I don't know who's going to be the true star on this defensive line. I don't know about if it's going to be Ontario Thompson. I don't know if it's going to be Zach Durfee or whatever else. Jayvon certainly could be that guy, but there's just so much around him where I think about the long-term future of this team, and he is certainly a key piece in that, where I think about 2026 and, just what it looks like beyond there. Jayvon is the kind of guy that could anchor that defensive line moving forward. And there's just no need to rush that back if you don't need to.
Exactly. And for all the reasons you mentioned, that's why I laid into that September, early October timeline, where it's not to say that he won't be ready by the start of fall camp, but that ramp up, if we see him get some, snaps to the first and second team by, call it week 2 or 3 of fall camp, that wouldn't be surprising, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to play in the first 3 or 4 games, because you look at it, Colorado State, UC Davis, Wazoo. Do you need Jayvon for any of those 3 games to come out 3-0?
No.
Ohio State is the only one where you can say, okay, maybe if you have some depth issues at that point in the season, which I don't think you will, but that would be the first game where I could see him potentially even coming back, just because of all the things you mentioned, the depth, the guys in front of him, the production, what you're expecting of those guys aside from Jayvon. So I think for me, if he does end up being ready to come back by, let's say, the end of September, call it a whole year, basically, by the time he had the injury, that's when I would start the clock. But that's also why you have 5 games, where if you don't just have to play, the one and then you burn your red shirt. You got options now. And so I think it's going to be after the Wazoo game, I'd say it's going to be, week to week in terms of when and how could you factor Jayvon in? Because if you have, let's say, Omar Khan is, popping, or Elinneus Davis is looking really good in the first 3 weeks, but you kind of want to keep that positive momentum going until really you have to put Jayvon in at that point. Like, there's no reason to rush him. There's no reason to force that hand because, again, you mentioned you have the medical redshirt, you have the depth, you have his twin brother, basically. It's, there's so many reasons to not rush him back, where if he does need to come back, it's because there's a couple other problems that have emerged between now and then.
So let's talk about one of the guys that we've mentioned his name a few times. The everydayers know we're very high in what his future looks like. That's Elinneus Davis. This is one of those guys where I think his emergence could end up factoring into what the plan is with Jayvon, because Elinneus is the kind of guy where we've seen him be very, very productive in limited snaps. Or I think about a couple of the just really nice splash plays he made at different points last season. We saw him really shine in the spring and take a big step forward. And now it's just continuing to build on that. And a lot of that was something you and I advocated a lot for on the show, was getting guys like that a larger snap count, which did not happen. And whether that was the coaching staff felt that they weren't ready just yet, whatever that might have been, because there were a couple other guys in that same boat. Whatever that is, that's in the past, because that was last season. If you don't feel comfortable in giving some of those guys bigger reps this year, whether it be, Bryce Butler being his second year in the program away from junior college, Elinneus Davis is a third-year sophomore, all those, it's time for those guys to kind of be thrust into a bigger role. I believe they're ready for it. We got to talk to Elinneus this spring, and he certainly sounds like he's ready for that bigger role. And in this defensive scheme, you're going to give him, you're just going to ease him in a little bit easier, I think is the best way to put it, because all of these matchups, everything that Ryan Walter's defensive scheme is about creating, it's all going to play to the strengths of all the interior guys, not just Jayvon, not just Elinneus, but having somebody really step up and say, hey man, it's okay. We understand that you are a big part of the future. I want to be part of that future as well. When we talk about Elinneus Davis, you could really build a defensive line around those guys and continue to, supplement through high school recruiting and add somebody to the transfer portal every single year, just one high-end pass rusher, if that's what you want. And a lot of that does depend on Elinneus taking a big step forward this year, because if he does, it's exactly what we're saying. You don't need to just really put a lot of stress on Jayvon and make him come back before he might be ready.
And it's also why you went and got, Simone Peppa and Ontario Thompson as one of your guys, just to supplement that offset where whether Elinneus pops or not, you have reassurance, you have insurance, basically what you're doing. And that's why you don't have to force Jayvon back, where if you don't get Peppa or Ontario or, let's call it 2 of the 3 combinations with him and Tai, then, yeah, you start to be a little more concerned, because now you're relying on Armand to pop, you're relying on Jayvon to come back, where if he comes back, when he comes back, should he come back, those are all things you can say those are luxuries in 2025, which is a good position to be in, because then in 26, you have a 4th-year Elinneus, you have Jayvon, you have Armand, and all those other guys who are now graduated. So you kind of rehash, we're going to reset the position, if you will, where you don't lose anything. You just kind of make sure between 2025 and 2026, we don't take a step back. If anything, we're taking a step up with some of the younger guys, and if Omar Khan also emerges as Bryce Butler pops, there's a number of guys along that defensive line who could pop. You don't ever know as a coaching staff which one it's going to be, and you don't want to pigeonhole one guy over another. You want to put all the bodies that you can in line. So you know what? Go earn it. You guys go figure it out. We got you here. You guys go figure it out. I think that's the best position Washington could be in, because last season it was who. Now this season it's how. How do you make it work? Not who is going to make it work. That's a huge difference, and that's why, again, if Jayvon does come back, great, awesome. That's just a bonus. Straight up, it's a bonus. That's all you need.
And just before we get out of here, one thing I want to add on top of that is you talk about stacking classes and what these veterans could do moving forward. It's why this 2026 defensive line class is so important, and why adding Derek Coleman-Brusa was such a nice start. And now it's why we harp on these guys like David Schwartzel, Kari Wilder, Tiayu Mukais. It's getting those interior linemen in the boat where it's, it's these high end where maybe you're not starting from a place of, oh, we feel that this guy needs to develop in these 5 different areas. It's no, this guy only needs to focus on 2 or 3 of them. We feel that he's already adequate and able to play because of, whatever skill set you might see. And that's so important. We're having a couple of these veteran guys to anchor that, where it's not a complete turnover, where it, you like to talk about just making sure that there's some kind of just stack in terms of classes and different things like that. This is the perfect way to make it work. We're adding a Kari Wilder and a Tiayu Bukais will give you so much more room to operate in terms of flexibility, in terms of a long-term future as well. There are so many different factors that play into that, and it's going to be really, really interesting to watch as we move forward. And Lars, the best place to keep an eye on everything that's going on in the world of Husky athletics right now is right here on Locked On Huskies. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the videos tuning in. And just a quick reminder, make sure you check out our Insider program. Again, the link is down in the description below. Get a free 2-week trial, and after that, it's $4.99 a month. We've got an Insider exclusive mailbag that's going to be coming up this Friday. You're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be a ton of fun. Lars and I absolutely love doing those. But until then, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.